switch gears to sex and gender now. So what is the difference between these two, and why is it so important to understand these distinct concepts?
It is an amazing question, Dr. Davis, and I'm not sure I can handle it in 5 minutes, but I'm going to do my best. I am a tangential speaker and I love to talk. So if I get off topic, will you draw me back in with some
Sure.
clarifying questions?
Deal.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Um, I do think this is a rich conversation because it falls in the categories of biology, psychology, history, culture, anthropology, linguistics, political science, religion, spirituality. Um, it can be overwhelming, and I think you can hear that when even those of us who are in the fields um, stumble on our words. It's because it's a very complex and rich conversation that we're having and learning. Today we're going to talk about it in science in medical realm because we're those nerdy girls, and that's what we do. So Dr. Davis, you discussed sort of the chromosomes behind biological sex and our physical bits and parts. Um, and you pointed to the fact that they exist on a spectrum of sorts. It's not neatly always just one thing or another, right? This is hugely important advancement in scientific and cultural understanding. Um, I do want to say as a caveat that many cultures across times and locations have long acknowledged and had or have language that reflects and respects this spectrum. But in our culture, we're getting better at it, recognizing it. Some of these physical bits and parts are visible, as you said, to ourselves, our external genitalia, secondary sex characteristics, and some parts are seen on ultrasound, other scans, or under specialized microscopes like the ones you use, Dr. Chana, to look at the very small bits. But they're all physical and all able to be measured. Of note, measured or described is different than defined. And I want to say that because defining something is a dynamic process that involves linguistics, culture, norms, history. So we want to be careful about saying we're, strictly defining anything. So gender are the attitudes, feelings, behaviors that a given culture associates with biological sex. Okay. Um, and from gender, in many languages, we have associated pronouns. In English, you're going to hear she, he, they, she, and many others. If you do a Google search of gender pronouns, you're going to find many. There's also gender identity, and that's our internal sense of self, regardless of what's happening around us in the culture. Sometimes, regardless of what our external genitalia is, sometimes it's relevant to our external genitalia. And then there's gender expression, and that's how we express ourselves through dress, style, behavior, activities. Now, when a culture's gender definitions match a person's biological sex, we call that cisgender, and that's Latin for on this side. When they differ, we call that transgender, and that's Latin for across or on the other side. And then sometimes, as you've spoken about spectrum, gender is on a spectrum as well. And so there's some folks who move between a binary mean two, they move between, they might call themselves gender nonconforming, gender fluid, non-binary, gender variant, gender neutral, agender. The words are expanding as we come to understand more and be more inclusive. So, how and why do we care about both sex and gender in science and medicine? Well, let's talk about the how first. We're getting better every day, but I'm going to give you an example of like a perfect scenario. Let's say I'm setting up a study, a research study, and I'm recruiting people with testicles for a study of an oral pregnancy prevention medicine that acts on sperm. Wouldn't that be amazing if we got that on the market soon? So I am using in that recruitment, I am using very scientific and anatomical language because it's precise and inclusive, right? I'm saying acts on sperm. I'm saying people with testicles. I'm talking about pregnancy prevention. So it's important then when we're recruiting for science, we're precise and inclusive. Another example in scientific and health communication, say I'm writing for those nerdy girls a post on who needs cervical cancer screen, which I actually have done, or who needs to do a monthly testicular self-exam. I may use language appropriate for a broad public messaging campaign, like all people with cervixes age 21 to 65, or all people with testicles age 15 and up. This is important to say it in this way. Dr. Davis, why don't I want to say all women age 21 to 65?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how we get pushback sometimes for using the language pregnant person rather than pregnant woman. So that just is this where it's not a fair assumption that somebody who has a certain body part has a certain associates with a certain gender.
Yeah, it's super relevant to cervical cancer screening, which I've written on and gotten pushback on, because a cisgender woman may not have a cervix if she's had a total hysterectomy. So I wouldn't want to just assume. And I've actually had people come in and been in the middle of a cervical cancer screening, and I find no cervix because no one has told them they don't need to come in for that. So it's very relevant that we, in these broad public health recommendations, we be as inclusive and precise as possible so that we don't end up with unnecessary procedures or missing someone who needs a procedure. So where does gender come in? Science communication and medical recommendations in medical care are most effective when there is shared trust between the science community and its audience, or the medical team and their patients. Trust is built by being seen, heard, respected, and honored as a full person. That includes our bits and parts and our internal sense of self. So writers, speakers, practitioners, we build trust in many ways, but one is using inclusive language when appropriate. There was a time when in formal writing and recommendations, we defaulted to the masculine pronoun he. You'll see that in the Declaration of Independence. You'll notice that our writing follows APA style and defaults to they as our singular generic third person pronoun. This is so our readers and listeners can find themselves in, regardless of their gender, in our information and recommendations. And it also is respectful of the experts that we're referring to. So we'll do this unless we know the gender or it makes sense to use the specific gender pronouns. It replaces writing his or her, which is very clunky in writing. And it respects the fact that there's the spectrum of those people who are non-binary. So I would say that accurate gender usage, gender identity usage, is also critical to improving health outcomes in the one-on-one clinical setting. At your primary care office, imagine your team's electronic medical record has your accurate name, your nickname, your honorific, your title, your biological sex, male, female, or intersex, your pronouns, where you can actually write in your pronoun if it's not listed, and your gender: cisgender woman, cisgender man, transgender woman, transgender man, non-binary, genderqueer, non-conforming, gender neutral, agender, gender fluid, etc. Language is dynamic, and so there might be things that I've missed. You will forgive me. This is what I have on the top of my head for the time that we have. But already when you are filling out your intake form, you feel seen, don't you? Now that you feel seen in this space, how much more trust is built when all the people in the building use and respect those integral parts of you. You're much more likely to participate and follow your healthcare plans. We see this in all areas of inclusion, not just gender, but in language inclusion, racial inclusion, ethnic and ability inclusion. And if we did a quick example about you, for example, going to the doctor, Dr. Davis, imagine the negative. Imagine the team didn't use your honorific or got your gender wrong and called you Mr. Davis, or didn't pronounce your name correctly and called you Chana. Would that set you up to trust the planning care of what vaccines you need? No, but the opposite is true. If they use your honorific, if they take into account your years of study experience and knowledge and call you Dr. Davis, if they use the language that you feel comfortable with by making notes in the electronic medical record, then you actually feel seen, heard, part of the team, so to speak, a partner in your care, and are more likely to take the medical advice that is given to you.